Welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. We're here to facilitate inspiring dialogues about the nature of consciousness across disciplines, communities, and practitioners, all with a holistic perspective.
From energy healing to somatic therapies, from neuroscience to meditation, we believe the most interesting things happen at the boundaries of disciplines.
I'm Christabel.
And I'm Keith.
Thanks for joining us today and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to this episode. Today we have with us Michael Oruch. President of the Zero Balancing Board of Directors, Michael Oruch is an established zero balancing teacher and practitioner based in New York City. He has taught zero balancing extensively in both the US and internationally, and has additionally spent many years studying Qigong and Tai Chi and related forms, which he has taught at New York University. Michael views zero balancing as a vehicle for health, wellness, and positive change, both personally and collectively. He was inspired to teach zero balancing, or ZB, following years of study and tutelage with the modality founder, Dr. Fritz Smith. He has made significant contributions to the ZB community as a mentor faculty advisor through teacher trainings and serving on various committees. He has also personally developed 3 zero balancing classes and 2 zero balancing training DVDs. Michael believes zero balancing can help a practitioner to be more present and clear in the world with themselves and each person they contact. So firstly, Michael, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today.
Thank you for having me. One thing in the bio, I'm the president emeritus. I'm no longer on the board.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying, Michael. As a starting point, I'd like to share with our listeners who may or may not be familiar with ZB, a definition from the website. Developed by Fritz Frederick Smith, MD, in the early 1970s, zero balancing is a powerful body-mind therapy that uses skilled touch to address the relationships between energy and structures within the body. Following a protocol that typically lasts 30 to 45 minutes, the practitioner utilizes finger pressure and gentle traction on the bones and joints to create fulcrums, or points of balance, around which the body can relax and reorganize. I wonder, Michael, if you could kindly expand a little bit on this so our listeners may understand more about the modality and approach of ZB.
Sure. The working paradigm, as you stated in the definition, is working with both energy and structure. There's some modalities, as you know, that work just with structure, things like chiropractic, osteopathy, things like that, and things that work with just energy in the field. Modalities like Reiki or Qigong healing is off the body generally. And so in zero balancing, we work with both energy and structure, and sometimes we need to be a little more structural, sometimes we need to be a little more energetic. And so we can calibrate our touch depending on the client's need. The other important part of the theory is that we have an energy model in ZB taken from a number of theories. So we've got the deep, middle, superficial, and background field. And so the deep layer is the bone and the skeleton, which is where we work in ZB primarily. The middle layer is the soft tissue, fluids, organs, meridians. The superficial layer is the Wei Qi, right beneath the surface of the skin. And the background field is the auric field around and through us. And by working on the bone layer and the skeleton, all those layers get addressed naturally. And then if need be, we can focus from the bone into those individual layers and including the field.
Thank you, Michael. You're talking here about the emphasis on bone. So the practice is very grounding, amongst other things. I'm wondering, could you speak to this bone element or the joint focus? And for a person who has no idea what zero balancing is, what is it like to walk them through what receiving a session is like?
Sure. One interesting part about the bone in the Chinese model, Chinese medicine, they say the ancestral qi is in our bones. So it's the elemental who we are. And in zero balancing, we amplify the bone energy. So the person naturally feels more grounded, more stable, more clear, and more connected, both to themselves and then the greater whole. And for a session, a person comes in, we do an intake, of course, and then we often have a frame for the session. So the person, we can ask them very simply, is there anything you would like to look at today, or anything we can do for you? Or more, is there anything that you're working on in your life, anything that you would like to address? And so it can go from the very pragmatic and physical to the very esoteric. Sometimes we have people who, dedicate their session to someone very distant, and they become the surrogate for that person. So it's a very, very versatile and very beautiful modality. So then we do a seated evaluation, and then we ask them to lie down on the table. And all the ZB sessions are done through clothing, and most of the work is done under the body, where we're actually lifting up under the body into areas of tension. And we only work into areas that are needed. So we're looking for areas of held tension, held energy. Held tension is essentially held energy. If you think about a spring wound tight, that's potential energy, and we put a fulcrum into that, and then we mobilize that held tension and held energy. So then the body then sorts it out. We're not trying to eliminate that tension, but we're trying to mobilize it so then it's more available to the client. So ideally, after a session, a person feels both more relaxed, but more energized. And they're more relaxed, obviously, because they're not holding the tension, and they're more energized because that energy that was held is now circulating back into their system.
Thanks, Michael, for explaining that so clearly. You mentioned this held tension, and I'm wondering how you personally perceive held tension or held vibration, it may be called, in someone else's body or field, and how that's evolved over time. We like to get a sense when we're talking to guests on these episodes about how a practitioner's subtle energy perception is actually working.
In zero balancing, it's all done through touch. And so we're palpating the body and palpating those areas and feeling for held vibration. And I like that you brought the word vibration in. We know vibration exists in all forms in the body, but also things from the past can be held vibration. So we know that particularly trauma and things that hang around for a while go deeper in the body, and they become, in a sense, hidden. And in zero balancing, we're working really on those hidden aspects of held tension or held vibration. We primarily address the foundation joints, and these are joints which have no voluntary movement. It's not like your elbow, which you can dissipate tension, but areas like the sacroiliac joints, the tarsal bones, these are all from osteopathy, what are called foundation joints. So their job is to transfer energy, and a small change in function can have a large change in the body. So it's something is held in the bone. The advantage of being able to work on the bone is that we can address it. If one is working in the more superficial layers of the body, the soft tissues, fluids, organs, the field even, to get to the bone level can be challenging and maybe difficult, and I don't want to say impossible, but not quite as direct as if you're able to touch the bone to release that held tension. And then it's naturally then more easily integrated into the system.
Maybe we can dip a little into your background. We didn't mention you're an artist, as well as Qigong, and of course your involvement with zero balancing. How do you identify as an artist, as a Qigong practitioner, as a ZB balancer? What's kind of leading you in your life around this, and how did that bring you to healing work?
Well, probably everyone who goes into the healing modality goes there to learn about themselves and to heal, no matter from Qigong and energy work to, a doctor or a nurse or a field researcher. So all sorts of things. As a kid, at about 8 years old, I know I wanted to be an artist. I don't know how, but I remember I was in third grade in Mrs. Randolph's class drawing birds. And I thought, I'm going to be an artist. And I wanted my parents to send me off to be an apprentice somewhere. How does a kid know that? I don't know. But my family was very acultural. But then at 13, I had a really good teacher in junior high, art teacher, and I also had a very good biology teacher. And the thing that fascinated me was the skeleton. I can still see it in the upper left, in the left-hand side of the room. And so I started drawing the skeleton. And so 13 was a very kind of pivotal year where I felt I could both be an artist and then this other aspect was ignited, so to speak. Yeah, as you said, I got involved. So I studied some, martial arts, but my real major introduction to the world of energy was through the world of Qigong. And I was walking by a place called the Open Center in New York that was an alternative healing educational center. And they had cut out their catalog. So there was a little piece of paper, like 2 by 3 inches on the window, and it said Soaring Crane Qigong. And it got my attention, and I went in to sign up for a class, and they said, well, you have to wait till the next one in January, which I did. And so, Mr. and Mrs. Wu were teaching it, and they had just come from China. They didn't speak any English, but they had a translator who spoke a little English. And at one point, Mr. Wu got up and he did the 5 routines, which is the core of Soaring Crane. The field of the room changed dramatically. And he maintained that field for almost 30 minutes while doing the routines. It was like you were bathing in a field of qi. And that really got everybody's attention. I'd never experienced anything like that. So I studied Qigong with them. And then their teacher was coming from China, Master Zhao, that summer to do a teacher training. And I spent the summer studying with him. And then I started teaching Qigong at NYU. I had an opportunity to do that. And I did that for 3 or 4 years. But the thing I learned was that it was about the world of energy. I went to China as well. And in the morning, woke up my first morning in China at 3 a.m. and it's kind of dark. People are out in the garden doing Qigong. But people's relationship to nature and energy was very tangible. People would hold their hand over a flower to feel the energy of the flower, or a tree, or get energy from the different elements of nature. We were in upstate New York studying and with Master Zhao, and he asked someone their favorite smell, and someone said roses, and he moved his hand and started to kind of energy in the room shifted a little, and pretty soon the entire room smelled like roses. We all had our mouths open, and so I said, how did you do that? He said, well, I traveled to a rose garden in bloom in France, and I brought that smell over. So I brought the vibration over. And he did the same thing a few days later when the room was very hot. He kind of cooled the room off. So this world of energy is very accessible, very mutable, very tangible, and very magical. So that kind of opened me up to the world of energy. And then at one point after learning Qigong, there was a doctor in class, and I needed some doctor stuff, so I went to see him in Brooklyn. And after the consultation, he had me lie down on the table and did some body work. Well, I kept going to see him and finally asked him about it. And it turned out it was zero balancing. And so I started to study zero balancing. I took a class, and then I wanted to meet Dr. Smith. His next class is in Salt Spring Island out in British Columbia. So I went out to British Columbia and studied with him. And he had just, in that time of his life, sold his medical practice, was starting to teach ZB full-time. He was in his early 60s. And he was going to be in Chicago the next week teaching ZB1. So I thought, I'll take ZB1 again. So I went and did it. And then he was going to be in Baltimore 2 weeks later. And I thought, well, I'll just go to Baltimore. Well, I'd gone to graduate school at Northwestern in painting, and I'd gotten a full scholarship, and which was great. And then to study ZB, I thought to myself, well, this is the graduate school I'll pay for. So I started to follow him around, and Dr. Smith graciously welcomed him. And I started to assist classes with him. And so for the next number of years, I took almost every class that he offered. And he was a very busy guy. I mean, he was teaching at least 2 classes a month. And so I became an apprentice, so to speak, and, studying ZB.
You mentioned there you studied extensively with Fritz Smith, Dr. Fritz Smith, the founder of ZB. I wonder if there's a personal experience or story you could share with our listeners that may help them understand a little bit more about him as a teacher, as an individual.
Well, he's a beautiful human being, and he developed ZB. He says he teaches to reduce suffering in the world. And he's one of the first physicians to become an acupuncturist in the state of California. So that was in the early 70s. So he was an osteopath and studying acupuncture with Dr. Worsley. And then he started teaching his classmates about how do you evaluate the structure of the body? And then they asked him, well, how do you balance it? And so out of that experience, he started teaching them, came zero balancing. And the word comes from someone having an experience that had a session, and they said, I feel so balanced. I feel like I'm in a state of zero balance. And so he liked that. So instead of, he studied with Ida Rolf. So instead of calling it Rolfing, she called it Rolfing, but instead of calling it smithing or, fritzing or something like that, he wanted to call it zero balancing. So it doesn't say much about exactly, what we do, but it does describe an experience. So his father was a chiropractor. So Fritz grew up in a household of highly conscious touch. He said his father never hit him or beat him, and it was always very loving and kind. And so when he developed this modality, he wanted it to also feel good. And so that's a key element. He didn't want it to be hurtful. So in ZB, we say everything should either feel good or hurt good. And that's an important concept. So at that same class in Chicago, that first class, after the class was over, he wanted to do a demo ZB, and he did it with the craniosacral teacher at the time. And toward the end of the ZB, we always ask the client, is there anything that we can look at or help you? I'm starting to close the ZB session. Is there anything else that needs attention? Is there anything else that we can look at? And so he asked that of the person, and she said, oh, there's something right here above my eye. And so he addressed that. And then anything else? Well, something back here on my shoulder. Anything else? Oh, there's something in my lower back. He addressed that. Anything else? Oh, there's something on my arm. He addressed that. Anything else? So this went on for maybe 10 things. And then he said, anything else? And she said, no, I'm good. So by this time, the room was totally silent. You could hear a pin drop. And at each stage, she dropped deeper and deeper and deeper into a healing state. And it was very tangible, and everyone could feel it. And then he got done, and she rolled on her side and sat up slowly. And the first thing she said was, oh, I get it. It's about love. And it was just a very beautiful moment. And I think that's the essence of Dr. Smith. And that part of the ZB session, it's very rare in life. You're asked if there's anything you need. You're able to say it. You're heard, and it gets addressed, and it feels good. And so that can be a very valuable and healing part of the session. And so I think that's kind of a good example of who he is and the nature and the tenor of ZB itself. It's very loving, very kind, very clear. And those are all concepts that he built into ZB.
Thanks, Michael. I had the pleasure of going through a bunch of the ZB curriculum. One of the things in getting off the table from a good ZB is you feel good, you feel grounded, but you also are accessing what you often are calling an expanded state, this amplification of the energetic or field aspect, but you're also grounded in your body because of the emphasis on freeing up the bone and this earth element component. Can you speak a little bit to this grounded expansion kind of quality to it?
Yeah, as you said, Keith, that going into an expanded state is a hallmark of zero balancing. If you think about held tension, it has a configuration, and sometimes it's held very tight. And when we put in a fulcrum, that held tension gets released more. And then we bring in what we call clear, stronger fields through the body to help release those vibrations that are essentially not ours, so to speak. And as you said, zero balancing feels good. It feels very good in rather a unique way because it feels good on the bone level, which for some people is a brand new experience. And it also is a very lasting experience. It's like a time release. So it continues after a session for a number of days before it's fully integrated. And if something feels good, it really is addressing the person on the spirit level, which is very important. So occasionally we'll get someone coming in and they'll say, I feel hopeless. Well, that's a challenging client or a challenging concept to really deal with. So during the zero balancing session, we might ask, how are you doing? Or how does this feel? And if the person responds, oh, that feels good, it's very hard to both feel good and feel hopeless at the same time. So then essentially that person has turned a very positive corner. And as you say, after the ZB, almost everyone not only feels good, but there's a sense of happiness and joy that is there. And I think part of that is from the integration of all the different layers of the body that we've addressed through zero balancing.
It's interesting you mentioned integration there, Michael. One of the things that we appreciate about ZB is that the ZB practitioners are not looking to force changes, but rather create conditions for clients to balance themselves, as it were. And so and this is, as I understand it, please do clarify, where the zero balancing fulcrums are engaging the client's body and mind and helping promote that rapid reorganization. And so the fulcrum in being released allows for the integration that you're referencing there. I hope I got that correct. So there's two key ideas there, fulcrums and self-organization. And I wondered if you could expand a little bit on those concepts for us.
When we put in a fulcrum at the bone level, it inherently addresses things at the more superficial layers as well. So that is naturally going to be an integrating event. As I said earlier, a person feels more grounded, more stable, and more integrated, and not just integrated on, say, the bone level, but integrated on the bone layer, the spirit layer, the mental layer, because all of these things are naturally addressed in a ZB session, and that's all built in, so to speak.
So to paint a really clear picture for people listening, one of the main things, as you mentioned, is coming underneath the body with your hands as the practitioner and palpating or working with feeling the different bony landmarks and bony structures of the skeletal system somewhat systematically to look for held vibration. So a fulcrum, let's say somebody's holding the back of my ribs, practitioner, and they feel along one of the ribs a held vibration. They would place their fingers, they would touch in a particular way into that rib, into that area where they feel the held tension. They would hold it, and that would be the quote unquote fulcrum. And then when they release it, the system can self-organize itself around that fulcrum. So one of the, again, a hallmark of ZB is this idea of the interface between the way that the practitioner touches the person, and it addresses this idea of structure and energy. Again, it's one of these things that are very particular and pretty amazing about zero balancing. So maybe you can explain to people this idea of how the boundaries are maintained and the orientation that ZB takes.
So a key concept of ZB is working at interface. So in ZB, we define interface as knowing where I stop and you begin, and you know where you stop and I begin. So we are not blended. So in a sense, this is the client's experience. It's not our experience. So the client's very empowered by this because they've had their experience, which we've helped facilitate, but it's not a co-experience in that same way that if we were blended. And we're working at interface on the bone level, which is also adds a sense of clarity to it. It's not only clarifying, but it's also very engaging, and it's very activating.
Christabel and I, we do a lot of energy work with people, a lot of distance energy work. And so one of the main things that comes up with people in terms of the learning curve, in terms of developing the practice of energy healing, is where do I begin and end in relation to a person I'm working on? And when we're doing distance work and we're working off the body in the field, it's a very blurry thing. We're very merged, and that's generally the orientation to doing energy work, is an unavoidable merger to some degree. What do you think useful, non-useful aspects of these different approaches to structure and energy, or blending and non-blending, just because it's such an interesting topic,
It's a fascinating topic. And it's fair to say almost no one grew up in a household at interface. There's a very powerful and important concept to being blended when you're holding a child, when your child gets hurt, you envelop them, you merge with them, you sometimes in a sense of intimacy, we want to blend and merge with the other person. But then it's really our experience. It's an experience together. And when there's an interface, there's a different level of clarity. And one thing that happens in ZB for a practitioner, as you practice this interface with your client, you start to notice areas in your life where you might not be at interface with another person or another situation, that sort of thing. So interface becomes a working construct in your life. And when I'm not at interface with someone, then I feel very uncomfortable. And I was totally unaware of this before. And so for students coming in, this is one of the eureka moments in ZB where they realize, we can go through the world being very intimate, but also being at interface. So there's certain concepts of ZB that translate to the world around us. So I think everyone would maybe benefit from knowing just the concepts of ZB, and particularly this concept of interface. And in terms of working at interface, then how can we work in the field at interface? So this is where it becomes more esoteric and more challenging and very important, because when the session is over, we want it to be over. I mean, years ago, it was after a class and my assistant brought their roommate and we had a very nice conversation. At the end, she kind of squeezed my arm and said, "Very nice to meet you," and left, and literally took part of my arm home because there was no clear disconnection. So the hallmark of ZB is there's a clear connection and a clear disconnection. And so I'm sure when you work with energy in the energy field, you have a clear disconnection. Without the clear disconnection, one is blended. And as you know, distance doesn't matter in that. So you're working in the field. So it's so important to be at interface, to have a clear connection and clear disconnection with your client. And then everyone leaves clear and happy, so to speak. And it's not confusing.
This is an incredibly fascinating area, Michael, as you say, because what we're looking at here is all the kind of relationship to what might be seen as being particularly empathic and being able to pick up information and content from people's field. The question that often comes up for our clients and people who are training with us around when they're working with somebody else and they're connecting into their system, what's mine, what's theirs, what's being brought up in me that's mine, but is coming up because of them, et cetera, et cetera. So I really appreciate that ZB has a clean approach and reference point to this, in interface, because it's very helpful. And this brings me to my next question. Actually, we were fortunate enough to experience a remote session with you in a group healing context recently, and you introduced the idea, and you referenced earlier as well, of the surrogate. So working either on somebody and that being received by somebody else, or in fact naming and dedicating a session to somebody else. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit to this idea of how that works, working in the field and dedicating to someone else, or for you as practitioner, working on a body and yet technically working on another body, as it were.
On one hand, it's a mystery. How does this work? But we know through Rupert Sheldrake and all these people that, distance healing does work. So in zero balancing, and for me, it makes it so much easier if I have someone on the table and then they can be the surrogate for another person. I think, one of the most moving things that's happened to me was I ran into a student from another city at the Whitney Museum. And I said, why don't you come in for a ZB? And so they did. And it turned out they had a family member in South America who was in the hospital. And the whole rest of the family was there except for her and her family, because they had small children. They really couldn't go. And she said, I want to dedicate this to my aunt. And so we did. And an amazing thing happened. So we talked about it, and she lay down on the table, and I said that this will be, dedicated to your aunt. And then at that moment, and there were an Orthodox Jewish family, that moment, surrounding the table, I saw in an inner vision a group of religious people there, and they said, this is a holy place. It's a holy place. And the field of the room changed radically. Even talking about it, I'm back there and I'm getting sort of a chill. So we did the session, and the focus of the session for her personally was to feel more stable and grounded and okay with the fact, but for her aunt, she wanted to send healing energy to her. So at some point it felt like her aunt was in the room with us, and I was working on not only the person on the table, but her family member. And it was very tender and very beautiful. And so when we got done, my client said she felt a lot better and more stable. And we ended at 4:00. And it turns out right at that time, her aunt was dying and passing. And her family members were in the room, and they saw kind of a wave of energy go through the room while we were working. And so the whole thing became a very meaningful event, both for my client and her family and me. And I think that was probably the most dramatic, distant healing or surrogate, dedication of a session that I've had. So how does it work? So during COVID, I wanted to provide ZBs for the community in a remote way. And so the first few times I did that, I did it with no person on the table. And so I essentially was working, I went through the protocol verbally, and I acted out the ZB session, and I was trying to hold the field for everyone with no one on the table. And I did it, but it was very taxing. And then one time I invited someone to be the surrogate, and it was much easier because I had a tangible body, and then that translated very easily through the field to everyone to receive that. When I studied Qigong, we did Qigong healing off the body, and the way we diagnosed was we would feel it in our own body, and then we knew what was going on with the other person. So obviously it didn't feel like interface, though I didn't have that word at the time. And so I'm very thankful for zero balancing because it's done through touch at interface. And we go through the body systematically. And no matter what a person comes in with. If you come with foot pain or back pain or shoulder pain or psychological pain, everyone receives the protocol. Within the protocol, from the outside, it all looks the same. From the inside, every session's radically different. And so the nice thing about zero balancing is the whole body gets addressed. And by the whole body getting addressed, also all of the layers also get addressed as well.
What has ZB given to you in terms of experience? Like, what was it like for you to receive zero balancing? What are the experiences you had? How did it change you or heal you or awaken you as you were receiving and doing it so much for so long?
I think one of the great things about zero balancing, as a practitioner, I feel better after giving a ZB. So for me, those concepts of interface was very important, of just healing my body was very important, of general maintenance of health is very, very important. I remember when I moved to New York when I was 24 years old, I said I want to get healthier as I get older. And ZB has been a significant part of that journey. Yeah, I think in doing ZB, for me, it's like doing 30 minutes of Qigong. I've developed a class called Form and Fulcrums where I've integrated Qigong theory into practicing ZB. So in doing ZB, I feel like I've had 30 minutes of a quiet mind, of full engagement, of being in the present moment. And so for me, that's probably been the most important part, is really doing ZBs in a sense at this stage of my career rather than even receiving them. I love receiving them. And afterwards, I feel great in a unique way. So they're both very important parts of my life, is both the giving and the receiving.
We discussed earlier, Michael, this idea of expansion and states of expansiveness coming up often for clients when receiving ZBs. I wonder how zero balancing orientates to consciousness itself. Is this related to the ideas behind spiritual awakening or enlightenment?
I think that concept of touching bone and who we really are is very important. For many people, that's the spark that begins their spiritual awakening. Everyone has that spark within them, and a variety of things can ignite that spark. And then it's up to people to maintain that, obviously, or to cultivate it. Energy centers need cultivation. The spirit needs cultivation. A man had read Fritz's book, Alchemy of Touch. He's written 3 books, 2 or 3 books, but he's got one called Alchemy of Touch. And in it, he talks about zero balancing can help a person become more enlightened. And so the client came in and said, I just read this book and that really got my attention. I'd really like this. I'd like to be enlightened by the session. Well, that's a big order and not something we promote or guarantee or can offer. But how do you deal with that request? And it was very interesting. And so every fulcrum I did to that part of the person who was enlightened. And we all have that within us. And to be able to see and touch that is a privilege. And it's very exciting. And it's very fun and very interesting. And so with every fulcrum, and this is very new to me to try and do this. And so every fulcrum went to that enlightened part of that man. And when he sat up, he looked absolutely radiant and enlightened, felt lighter in being, and with sort of a radiant light coming off. And happy, happier, so to speak. So is that enlightenment? I don't know, but it certainly affected his consciousness in a very positive way. And it affected my consciousness as a doer in a very positive way. I learned something very important. I think in ZB, it's all very tangible. It's all done through experience, and people feel it in their bodies, but then we also feel it in the field. There's a field phenomenon we know that the field changes, and the field changes in a tangible way. Sometimes we put in one fulcrum and the entire room goes quiet and it goes silent and it becomes more organized. And so this inner congruency that happens in a session affects the field, and everyone can experience and feel that. So we know then it's real. It's not just some imaginative construct.
What are the most common issues that people come to see you with? Let's just forget about physical stuff. What about psycho-emotional issues? And then how do you perceive psycho-emotional issue in the bone?
It often manifests itself as held tension. So everything comes back to held tension. And it's hard if someone's coming in, if they have a physical pain, there's a psycho-emotional component. Sometimes it's rare a person comes in with a psycho-emotional component without any physical manifestation of that. And that can be sadness, it can be stuckness, it can be, difficulty in relationship, it can be feeling ungrounded, unstable, all of those things. And then we palpate the system, we palpate the skeleton, and where we find tension. And just because of the frame that they've made, they've come in and say, I'm having trouble in my relationship, I'm having trouble with my work, I'm stressed here, I'm stressed there. Well, then those places that we're feeling tension are related to the stresses that they're having in their life. And sometimes we say, as you feel tension leaving the body, feel that it's the stress of your job leaving, feel that it's the stress of your relationship leaving, feel that your life is coming more into balance, those kinds of things. One thing I want to come back to is that aspect of the hidden. The places that we work in ZB are places that people often don't even know that they have in their body. Very few people know they have sacroiliac joints or think about them. Even tension on a rib. We don't go around thinking, oh, I've got tension in my fourth rib, because we're unaware of it until we're touched. Fritz has often said we introduce people to themselves through zero balancing. And I had a terrific Jungian therapist I worked with years ago, who's now passed away, Dr. Greg Firth, but he said the shadow is unmanifested potential. The shadow is unmanifested potential. Well, in ZB, that's essentially what we're working with, is unmanifested potential. And I think that's just a beautiful concept. And so it allows a person to become more of themselves, more of who they are. And some people make very radical, positive life changes. Recently I had a client come in whose primary focus was feeling safe. They'd grown up in a household of domestic abuse from their parents. After the first ZB, she said, this is so weird. She kept saying this is weird, but she started to feel more stable in an unfamiliar way. And I live in Chinatown in New York and on the Bowery, and the last few years have been a little rough. And there's a lot more kind of homeless people in the street and a few more kind of crazy people around. And anyway, my client come, and we like to see people for 3 sessions in ZB. And that's so we have 3 sessions to help them. The first ZB, it's kind of mysterious, just like this client kept saying, well, this is weird, I don't know what's happening. And so by the second or third ZB, they kind of get a sense of, what it is. Came for the 3rd session, she said, I didn't tell you this, but last week I was early and I walked around the block and someone had exposed themselves to me. And I said, stop and, get back and don't do this. And then she kind of walked on. And she said, normally, before I started seeing you, normally I would have frozen. I would not have been able to say anything, and I would have just crumbled in the street in tears. But she said, I just said, stop. I walked on, and I felt fine. And that has just continued in her life. She's made incredible positive changes, bought an apartment, and it was just that ZB came at a critical point in her life. She'd been doing lots of personal work, lots of therapy, but ZB then was the instigator to help her feel more stable, more safe, more grounded, more clear, more herself. And she just moved through her life very beautifully in a relatively short time. So that concept of connecting to who you are beneath your family stuff, beneath your trauma, beneath all these things that really aren't ours that we take on through childhood. And in a sense, ZB, we lift up and they let go. And oftentimes the feeling afterwards, the person feels more free. And it doesn't even have to be free from something specific. We know that probably in utero and in childhood, we take on things that aren't ours. They're from our family lineage, they could be from our parents, and somehow we get these constructs that aren't really ours. And as they let go, we naturally feel more free, happier, more connected, more ourselves. And so there's a significant, psychological component that ZB can have. And it's not that we even need to focus on it. A person comes in with back pain. Most people come in for aches and pains, but a lot of people do come in for life stresses. And so it doesn't matter really what they come in for. All of these layers of the body really do get addressed.
As a final question, just wondering, what do you see as a future ambition for you? Like, what's the carrot leading you forward in your life, in your world, in terms of excitement, ambition? What's coming up for you in your development as a human being?
As a human being, I think I've been a painter now for 45 years. I'm still really interested in exploring my studio life. I'm still interested in, I'm trying to get some of the zero balancing material that I've developed into a form that can be more widely disseminated. So that's kind of a project that I'm working on. I just keep on keeping on, I think, really.
As we move to a close here, we'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about any upcoming projects you may have or classes where people could connect with you if they were interested.
Sure. There is one thing I'd like to mention. Recently, as you know, there's been a big interest in kind of psychedelic use in psychotherapy, and I've had the opportunity to work in the last couple of years with a number of people for integration of their psychedelic journeys. And I think this has great potential for ZB. There's a lot of organizations now working with integration, and mostly it's psychotherapeutic integration after psychedelic journey. And I think ZB has an important role in the touch aspect. As we know, if it's not integrated into the body, it's hard to be, fully integrated. Yeah. So all of the programs in Zero Balancing can be found on zerobalancing.com. We have a number of teachers in ZB. We've got a whole new group of teachers teaching ZB1, which is ZB, 1 and 2 core ZB program, which is very exciting. I've got ongoing classes, both in form and fulcrums and core ZB. Every year we do a retreat down in Mexico at Mar de Jade. I'm doing a program in Evanston, this month with Mary Murphy, and it's the Art of ZB, and the subtitle for this one is called, Cultivating Presence, which is a beautiful concept. We've got lots of ongoing programs. If you're interested, I encourage you to go to the website. All of the teachers listed are really happy to talk with anybody about Zero Balancing if you're interested in coming. People are, welcome to email me. So we've got a very vital group of teachers and a vital group of practitioners throughout the country. That said, ZB is mostly not well known. We think it's the greatest thing out there, and it can help almost everyone in all manners. But through this program and others, we hope it becomes more well known. And the purpose of ZB is to really help people. And that's why Dr. Smith really developed it and has devoted his life to it.
And if somebody were to be in New York and wanted to receive a session from you, how would they reach you?
They would reach me via my email or my phone. My email is mozb33@gmail.com. And that's probably the easiest way. Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure to pick your brain a little bit today around your various experiences and all about zero balancing and yourself, of course, as well. So thank you so much for your time. And I think this is really enriching for people listening, as well as informative about what opportunities they may have with modality such as zero balancing, which has so many things to offer.
Well, thank you both for having me, and hope to see you in New York at some point.
Thank you, Michael. Many thanks.
Thanks for listening. You can find us at fielddynamicshealing.com.